So, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the annual Harshman Lecture, which is a community event for both members of the... So it's town and gown, really. We've got members from the community and members from the university. It's hosted by the Department of Family Relations and Applied Human Nutrition, which is a part of the College of Social and Applied Human Sciences. And first of all, I'd like to recognize the Dean of the College and thank him for his support. My name's Michael Nightingale. I used to do his job, but I'm currently Chair of Family Relations and Applied Nutrition. First of all, one or two words about the Harshman Lecture, which is supported by the H.H. Harshman Foundation. It was Hubert Harshman, who was the founder of Carlton Cards, who was keen of assisting needy, able students. He also was concerned about serving society. He was also, Michael Rich, he was concerned about the brain drain to the United States. So part of the reason you're here is to ensure that we don't lose Canadians to you. So, and it helps, the foundation helps in two ways. It provides scholarships, and it provides an annual lecture. And I'd like to recognize the representative of the Harshman Foundation. I know Grace. Grace, would you please stand up and just be acknowledged? Grace is our... is a wonderful friend. She is the widow of the great nephew of Hubert Harshman. So we're delighted to see her here. I'd also like to ask the people, and Grace doesn't know you're here, I'd like all the people that have received the Harshman Scholarship to stand up. So these are representatives of the many people that have received financial support in their programs and so on, and we're so delighted to see you here, and I hope some of you will introduce yourselves to Grace after the event is over. The main speaker for today is sitting in the audience and said, well, you can take over, Michael, you're the ringmaster. He's described as the mediatrician. And I've been trying to find out a little about the mediatrician. Well, on his website or resume, the first thing he says is he has a family of four children. And it seems to me, with a department that's concerned with family relations, somebody that puts family first is significant, important. He has a number of roles. He's a pediatrician of adolescent medicine at the Children's Hospital, Boston. He's director of the Center on Media and Child Health. He's director of the Video Intervention Prevention Assessment. He's an associate professor, I don't know how he finds the time to do that, in pediatrics at the Harvard Medical School, and also of the Human Development Health part of Harvard. So he has a number of roles. Of course, they've just changed their name too, so I haven't got the new name, so I'm out of date there. Originally, he was a Hollywood and then a Japanese filmmaker. And over dinner, I asking him, why did you leave? And I'll leave it to you to share with people of what the reasoning for that was. We have one or two things in common. He states the films that entertain him and the films that make him think. And of those, I would agree, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest had the same impact on Michael as it had on him. I also discover that he does use Twitter, actually. And in the last few days, he's been sharing good news about the statistics about teenagers and drugs and alcohol and such things. He's also been serving the bad news that the movies are now portraying e-cigarettes in their movies. So that was his good and bad news. I'm not going to speak anymore. You came to listen to Michael Rich, not to me, so I'd like now to introduce Michael Rich. I took the formal setting. I know you're going to take the informal setting. And he's going to speak on the title that you can see, and you can read as well as I, so I won't read it to you. So welcome, Michael, to Guelph.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. And he's right. I'm going to be as informal as we can be. And that includes, if I say something you disagree with, I want you to argue with me. Or if something that's confusing, I want you to question me. We could be here all night, but I don't want this to be sort of sitting respectfully and listening. Because part of what this is about is that we're all figuring out how to raise healthy, safe, and productive digital natives. And we need each other to do this. Certainly, I and the Center on Media and Child Health try to collect data and have it be as evidence-based as possible, much the way we practice medicine or nutrition or safety. But the reality is, this is a moving target and it's a moving environment, and we need to really depend on each other to teach and learn from each other as we go. One of the things I want to do with this talk is take something that you've all thought a lot about, otherwise you wouldn't be here tonight. You actually know quite a bit about it, and see if we can't throw out a lot of your preconceptions and think about it in a new way. And the reason why I say that is that historically there has been a debate or a struggle between protecting children and raising healthy children and freedom of expression, as if they are opposed to each other. And that is because very early in the days when television was rapidly penetrating, at least in the United States, there was concern that kids watching Gunsmoke would become juvenile delinquents. Right? And so they had congressional hearings, et cetera, and it was very quickly set up as a values-based discussion, right and wrong, should and shouldn't. And what ended up happening, of course, is that that flies directly in the face of freedom of expression, because everybody has different values. So let's put aside our values that lead us to even the way we talk about it, the idiot box, the boob tube, right? And think about it in a different way and reframe it in the sense of child development and public health. So let's go right at the preconceptions. What's happening here? Are they learning, or are they falling behind? Or both? Now, as many screens as there are in our lives, still television, at least in the United States, and I apologize that most of my data are from the US because the US has collected more data than anybody. But these data are from 2010. They're collected every 5 years. I think it's no surprise that essentially 100% of American homes have televisions in them. Even homes without running water have televisions in them. But there are some very surprising data inside this fact. More homes had 7 or more TVs than one. 45% say that television was on all or almost all the time that someone was at home and awake. 63% had it on during meals. And 75% of children in the first year of life watch television for almost 2 hours a day on average, as opposed to 23 minutes of being read to. Now, this is thousands of kids across, all socioeconomic groups and all demographics. So why are kids using screens? Time and again, when I talk to parents, they say it's because they believe that children need to become facile with media early. It's like voting in Chicago. Do it early and often. When you look at the data, 32% of parents believe TV helps their children, 34% believe it harms them, and 33% believe it makes absolutely no difference. That's like rolling the dice. That's like the law of probability, a third, a third, a third. But here's the interesting fact. There is no relationship between what they believe the effect of television is on their kids and their rules in the home. So just as many parents who think television is bad for their children have their kids watch for just as much time as the ones who think it's good for their children. 6% know that pediatricians actually have any recommendations around media use. Only 6% are aware of it, and that's our fault as the pediatricians for not informing people. So how many of you seen this? Look how smart my baby is. Pull out the iPad and he can make the cow go moo. Guess what? Every baby can do this. This shows how smart Steve Jobs was. This is the most transparent interface that's yet been created between a thinking machine, an entertainment machine, and the human mind. 10% of children use a tablet or a smartphone by the age of 1. Who was it? It was Grace, your 4-year-old, was able to do the smartphone better than you were. What we know from about 30 years of educational data is that no significant learning occurs from a screen, a passively watched screen, under the age of about 30 months. That doesn't mean they can't see stuff and mimic it. What it means is that this is not learning as we understand or hope it, as in retained information and retained skills. The American Academy of Pediatrics discourages screen time under the age of 2, not because, as many people believe, it's toxic for them, but because it is relatively impoverished time for their brain development. So compared to what else they could do. So instead of putting the kid in front of the television while you're getting dinner on the table, pull out some pots and pans and a wooden spoon. It'll get noisy, but they'll be learning more than they will in front of that television. In fact, when the pediatricians first came out with the recommendation to discourage screen time under the age of 2, there was a huge backlash, at least in the US. And I would speak to parent groups, and I'd have people stand up and say, there is no way I can get food on the table if I can't put my kid in front of the television. To which I would respond, then how did we as a species survive without eating till 1947? We have fallen into a default relationship with these screens that it's the only solution we can think of for many, many things. Why am I so concerned about brain development? Well, the human brain is actually embryonic at birth. Think about it. All of our other organ systems are functional versions of what they're going to do. Our brain is completely helpless. We can't get warm, we can't get food, we can't do anything we need to survive. We're utterly dependent on a parent or other to survive. What that does for us, though, is allows us to build the most complex and sophisticated brain in the animal kingdom because we get to build it in response to the environment in which it needs to function. And so the demand of that environment forms synaptic connections. Our brain triples in volume in the first 2 years of life. And not only are we forming billions and billions of synaptic connections, but we are pruning away billions as well. Why would we want to kill off connections? Because that's how we improve our signal-to-noise ratio. That's how we know that that pattern of light and dark is mommy's face, or that smell is milk. So the idea is you want to have your child to be in the richest possible environment while they're doing this building and connecting. So what does that infant brain need? Well, obviously we're still learning all the time, but 3 things we see time and time again that you need are human interaction with another human being, acting on the physical environment, stacking up those blocks or getting that piece of cereal in your mouth, and free, open-ended play and creative problem solving. So a sandbox and a bucket of water, or a blank piece of paper and a crayon. The problem is that screens do not do any of these. Not one of them. In fact, even the best educational software basically mimics what you can do with finger paints, or you name it, and you look at it time and again. So one of the studies we did at the Center on Media and Child Health a number of years ago now is followed a cohort of children from birth to the age of 3 and looked at their screen media use and looked at their visual and verbal IQs at the age of 3. And those kids who watched more, this was when this was the #1 baby shower gift in the US. Okay. Has anybody here seen a Baby Einstein video? Can you imagine Einstein ever having watched one of those? Just think about it. Anyway, and this was in Pediatrics, which is our leading pediatric journal. And the interesting thing about these data is that when we looked at the kids at the age of 3, what do you think their IQs were? Better or worse than the kids who had less screens? Same? Actually, they were worse IQs. They were lower IQs. But when we did a little bit of a deeper dive and controlled for a lot of factors that we know go into IQ, such as breastfeeding, a parent at home, reading to the child, siblings, etc., we found that the independent effect of screens went away. And so what we think we were seeing there is that it is actually a marker for a host of parenting decisions. The person who would park their kid in front of a screen instead of reading to them or talking to them is more likely to make a lot of other decisions that feed into what their ultimate IQ is. So once they get to 30 months, what are they learning? Well, this is now, we now have about 1.5 generations of experience with Sesame Street. And what we have seen, because this is actually, it still remains perhaps one of the best researched media for children out there in terms of both how they produce it, but also what the outcomes are after the kids see it. And what we see is that the kids who watch Sesame Street between the ages of 3 and 5, which is the developmental stage it's designed for, are more ready for school. They have more pre-reading and pre-math skills. And interestingly, the most robust effect is that they are more pro-social. They live in a more diverse, tolerant, inclusive world. Remember, everybody's on Sesame Street, right? They're disabled folks. There's all kinds of things going on. Interestingly, when you go back to these same kids as high school seniors, at age 17, they're less aggressive, they place more value on achievement, they read more books, they're more creative, and they have higher grades. Now, again, a caveat. This may, again, be a marker for a whole host of decisions made through this whole kid's childhood. The parent who's going to put their kid in front of Sesame Street may be making different choices in a lot of realms than the parent who's going to put them in front of entertainment TV. And they're not all watching Sesame Street. This is a little video I'm going to show you of an experiment done by a colleague of ours in Minnesota with kids in a preschool, with the 2 most popular shows of the day.
Hit the cameras and film the kids watching current shows of Barney and then Power Rangers. The kids reacted to Barney with especially. Watch how the kids interact once the show is over. They use the maracas to make music. After watching the Power Rangers, the change was immediate. While some kids exploded, others were transfixed, clearly identifying with different characters. The Power Ranger message of beating someone up for a good cause was lost. The group decision. Remember, here are the kids with Barney. What else do I see? Here are the kids with Power Rangers. And instruments after Barney were now weapons.
I love this little girl who just wants to play dress up. Will someone play with me?
Well, my son was one of the ones that was sitting quietly throughout the whole thing, and now he's bouncing around, hitting people, and, you know, just acting crazy.
One of the things that's interesting about preschoolers is they're yet to be civilized. And so you see exactly what's going on for them. But the point here is that the content matters. They are learning not just their ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, they're learning the way the world is and the way to behave in it from Power Rangers and from Sesame Street and Barney. One of the best researched areas we have, in the sense, because that's what people were most worried about back in the 50s, is violence. We have over half a century of research from a lot of different disciplines that have looked at the effect of violent media on outcomes, on how we behave. And what we have seen consistently in study after study after study is one or more of 3 outcomes. The first one, particularly with younger kids, but with everybody, is an increase in fear and anxiety. Think about it. Even when you go see a scary movie, your heart races, you know, the adrenaline's flowing. But in little kids who are still building their picture of what the world is like, this is going into the memory banks of the world is like this. What happens to us all is we are desensitized. We are an adaptive organism. We will adapt to high altitude by making more red blood cells. And if we are in an environment where we're surrounded by violence, we will get used to it, accept it. And in some kids, and this is actually the least prevalent response, but the one that society is most worried about, we find increased aggressive thoughts and behaviors. Now, this argument always comes up whenever there's a school shooting, like Sandy Hook most recently. And the phones are ringing off the hook. Was it because he was playing violent video games that he did this? And as tragic as they are, school shootings are exceedingly rare events in terms of the big population. But there is something going on every day in virtually every community that is a much larger epidemic, and that is bullying. Now, the research on bullying is that you need 3 components for bullying to occur. You need a bully, you need a victim, and you need bystanders, people who let it go on, sometimes encourage or cheer it on. Look at how those 3 map onto the 3 outcomes we're seeing consistently from violent media. So the question is, are we training our children to expect a world like this and to learn to live in a world like this? So how real is this strength? One of the things you can do, without boring you with stats, but one of the things you can do with epidemiology is look at the relative strength of correlations. How often when this occurs does that occur? How often we are exposed to this germ does someone get infected with it? And so we can compare it to things that we sort of have a relationship or know something about. So this is the relative strength of calcium intake and bone mass, between passive smoke and lung cancer, between lead exposure, those paint chips in them, and mental retardation or lower IQ, and between not using a condom and becoming infected with HIV. These 4 relationships, and many others, are ones that we accept essentially as fact. We guide our lives, we guide our children based on this. This is the relative strength of the relationship between media violence and the least prevalent of those 3 outcomes, increased aggressive thoughts and behaviors, and yet we have yet to deal with this as a health issue. Yeah?
What are we looking at in terms of what the actual numbers are?
R squares. Do you know R squares?
Vaguely.
We really don't want to get into it. We can talk afterwards. But it's basically measuring the strength. An R square of 1 is that every time A happens, B occurs, right? That doesn't happen in real life.
That's not 1.
No, this is 0.15, these are 2.0, this is 3, or those are 2, I don't remember, this is 2.5 and this is 0.4. Okay, so these are still, this is considered a moderate effect, not a small effect or not a large effect. What it's more is to put it in context with things that we deal with every day. Drink your milk and build strong bones, right? That sort of thing. And interestingly, we can put kids in an MRI tube and look at their brain at work with something called functional MRI. And this is the outcome. This is the only part there'll be a quiz on. You don't get to leave until you pass the quiz. But here's what we did. We put kids 5 to 8 in the tube, and we showed them 3 things. We showed them basically a neutral screen. It was basically an X that would fire off all the visual tracks. We showed them exciting but non-violent car racing, and we showed them a boxing scene from a PG movie, one of the Rocky movies. And we looked at what fired off in their brains for all three of them, and then we subtracted out the things that were all in common. And what was really interesting is this is what was left that happened uniquely with interpersonal violence. It happened largely on the right side of the brain, which is what carries our negative feelings in our limbic or our emotion system. And it happened in three areas. Our amygdala, which is our fight or flight center. Our motor planning area. Remember, they're in the MRI machine. They can't move, but they're ready to move. And an area called the posterior cingulate, which is the same area that lights up when PTSD patients are asked to relive their traumas in the tube. And so one of the things that we're thinking is that we're seeing the neurobiological basis for the behavioral stuff we see, which is that this is something that is laying down layers of memory. And this is our survivor's memory. This is why our ancestors made it out of the way of the saber-toothed cat and went on to have us. Because they were able to remember the signals of what is scary and what is to be avoided. And it's not just violence. This is Natalie Portman in her very first movie, a movie called The Professional at age 11. And she played a homeless girl who was being raised by a hitman who would go off and do all kinds of mayhem to people and come back and try to raise her, including trying to get her to quit smoking. And the reason I use this image is that when you look at impressions of smoking in the movies, and now presumably of e-cigarettes as well, which are being sold to us, on the basis that it's a way to quit smoking. Yeah, right. But what we know is that when you look at kids who don't smoke, and you look at the movies they watch, and you divide them into quarters, so the quartile that has the most smoking impressions versus the least smoking impressions, and you look at non-smoking kids 2 years later, those who watch the most smoking impressions, when controlling for all the other factors we know go into smoking, like parental smoking, access to cigarettes, etc., those kids, compared to the least impressions, are 2.6 times more likely to start smoking, and they're 2.2 times more likely to develop a smoking habit over time. And it's not just violence and smoking, it's also what happens when the healthy adolescent girl confronts the average model selling her clothes. This is what's called a thinspiration or a pro-ana-site. They're also pro-mia, so pro-anorexia, pro-bulimia, not seeing them as illnesses, but seeing them as chosen lifestyles, even political stances. And they try to gather others and inspire them. If you want to be thin, you have to have control. You can control your life. Anna is a way of life. Embrace it. And they compete with each other on Instagram. And how about sex? I love this teen magazine. The headline or cover story is, "Let's talk about sex. Make your school's sex education stimulating." What does that mean? Start deconstructing that little statement. Anyway. But kids learn from the media they use. They learn about the world. They learn the way they should behave in it, the way others will behave in it. And one of the things I teach, in fact, Jess Haynes, that has invited me up here, was one of the lectures in a course I do at the Harvard School of Public Health on adolescent health. And one of the things that I do is I have them not only read a bunch of public health papers and a textbook, but see a teen movie for every class. Why would I do that? Well, it's fun. No, it is fun. But think about it. Kids, how teenagers seen by society has a huge effect on them, and they learn how to be teenagers from watching the movies. Right? They learn how to kiss. They learn how to talk to somebody they're interested in romantically. They learn how to fight. They learn how to do a lot of things from the movies. So when you look again at the most sexual references and innuendo, and I'm not talking porn here at all. This is television. This is all television stuff. And you look at the tweens who watch the sexual content compared the most to the least are becoming sexually active 2 years younger than those who watch the least impressions. Not only that, but those kids who listen to sexually degrading, misogynistic lyrics in music are twice as likely to initiate sexual activity and to advance more quickly sexually. Interestingly, it's not just the guys, it's the girls too. And I actually had a 16-year-old girl come in and say to me, "I don't think my boyfriend loves me anymore." Why? He hasn't hit me in a really long time. And this is, she wasn't, making this up. This is really what her context was for this. So, all of this, from Sesame Street right up through to sexually degrading lyrics, one of the things to take home from this that may be a change in the preconceptions is that all media are educational. What differs is what they teach and how well they teach it. And we have to get to a place where we recognize that what we feed a child's mind is as important as what we feed her body. We have whole systems, whole governmental systems in place to make sure that we are feeding safe food to our children. So we can walk down a supermarket aisle and pick up labels and read them and know exactly what we're putting in their bodies. We do not have anything close to that for what we put in their heads. And yes, there are rating systems out there. But if you look at the history of the rating systems, they're not there to protect children. They're there to protect the industry from censorship. And research that we did a few years back showed that, at least in the US, the movie rating system shifted one full rating every 11 years toward the more lenient. So what was R is now PG-13. So what's happening here? Is she connecting, or is she at risk? Or again, both. One of the things to recognize is that media are an incredibly fertile environment for the key developmental tasks of adolescence. Think about it. If you're a Piagetian, they're able to do abstract formal thinking for the first time. This is the time when they start hugging trees and saving whales. Social justice. The entire Occupy movement started as a tweet in Vancouver, British Columbia. Social media is incredibly rich for coming together, connecting with people who you agree with, who can get a movement going. They seek experience. This is actually a video game given out by the US Army to recruit young men, showing us what it's like to fight. They seek independence from their parents. I was skiing a couple of years ago and went into the lodge, and there's a big happy family around talking to each other, and two 11-year-olds texting madly. And so I was just curious. I went up to one of them and I said, "So who are you texting?" Her. They were texting each other, because that way mom and dad wouldn't know what they were saying or what was going on. It was probably mostly LOL and WTF, but... The other thing that the internet does is it allows kids, they are sorting out who they are, what their identity is, to find a community, to connect with others. This is a guy from Montana. You know, historically, he wouldn't have found anybody who was into what he was into, who was like him, anywhere within 100 miles. But he has a community online. And they seek connection. This is now the third largest nation on Earth. More than 1 billion people sign on to Facebook every month. That's more people than are in anywhere except China and India. So what about the time they're using? Well, these data from 2010, we're about to start looking at the 2015 data, or start collecting them, show that when you ask kids what they do with their time on average, and you do the 24-hour pie chart, it looks pretty diverse until you realize what types, you categorize what types of activity is, and you realize what a huge chunk of it is media. And kids at that time were using media on average for 7 hours and 38 minutes of every day. And this did not include, because these data were first collected in 1999, this does not include cell phones, which have become, sort of come into their own since then. So what happened to the... Projector just went off. So this is where I tap dance. I'll tell you what, I'll keep talking, and we'll hope that the projector comes back on. So we started collecting data on cell phones after the fact, and this 7 hours and 38 minutes every day does not include a half an hour of talking and an hour and a half of texting they're doing as well. They look like they're working on it.
They are.
Okay, I will keep talking. And this is something that also, use of media is not sitting on the couch in the living room watching television anymore. Right? Kids are multitasking 28% of the time. They're using 2 or more media simultaneously. They're watching a television show and texting with their friends, like commentary. Are doing their homework online, you know, and they have a window open for IMing, and they have, you know, a download going of the latest music, and they've got, you know, stuff going on, YouTube's playing. So when you look at their cumulative media exposure in that 7 hours and 38 minutes, they're exposed to 10 hours and 45 minutes of content every day. And one of the things that we are not clear on at this point is what the difference between primary and secondary exposure is. In other words, if you're paying attention to something, does it have more of an effect on you, or is something over there having more of an effect on you while you're doing your English paper, but there's this mayhem going on the screen? Now, you think at first, well, of course, if you're paying attention to the mayhem, you're going to learn mayhem. But what we see from the data are not that people go out and copy what they see in the movies or television, or even in video games. What happens is the center shifts. What happens is what's acceptable changes. What they're not as upset about. What they're not as likely to step up and say, hey, stop hitting that kid in the playground, or stop giving a wedgie, or stop being mean to that girl and ostracizing her. So I'm just going to keep talking, and we'll put slides in there when later. So how do we kind of grapple with this as a society? One of the things that I'm a true believer in is learning from history. He who does not learn from history is doomed to repeat it. Let's go back 100 years and look at the things that caused morbidity and mortality in kids, that caused death or long-term debilitation. The leading causes of death, once you got through the birth period, were infectious diseases, birth defects, and cancer 100 years ago. Now, interestingly, we could do nothing about, we as in the medical community could do nothing about any of those. Not only did we not understand the human genome or the cancer process, we didn't even have antibiotics 100 years ago. So we held their hands, we hydrated them, and we hoped for the best. But when we looked at the environments in which these children were growing up and living and realizing that they were dirty, they were crowded, they were full of toxic waste, and we took environmental measures to clean up the environments, then we were able to drop those rates dramatically. Today, the leading causes of death outside the perinatal period are injury, homicide, and suicide. 1, 2, and 3. Again, US stats. It may be different in Canada, but probably not a lot different. Certainly an injury is the leading cause. These are very different than what was going on 100 years ago. These are what we call acquired health risk behaviors. Not only that, but acquired health risk behaviors are responsible for the long-term morbidities we're seeing starting in childhood. Obesity, risk-taking, sexual behaviors, substance use. So if these are acquired health risk behaviors, where do they acquire them? Well, my theory is you always ask the experts, ask the kids. When you ask them where they learn about relationships, about nutrition, about how to get along in the world, they cite entertainment media as their first or second most important source of information. Sorry, mom and dad, sorry, teachers, but they're learning from entertainment. Hey, we've caught up. Perfect. So maybe we should start thinking about television, the internet, what's out there in the ether, not as vectors of harm or vectors of education, good and bad, but as the environment in which they're growing up. We're surrounded by screens. We have them in our pockets. We have them on the walls. And sometimes we even have them up here. Sorry. That was a little snarky. I apologize. But maybe if we think about them like the air they breathe and the water they drink, we can get a more holistic, but also a more useful way of understanding it for dealing with it and going forward. Because guess what? They're not going away. Pandora's box is open. We can't be Luddites and turn it off. And in fact, after talks like this, I usually have one or two parents who come up and say very self-righteously, we don't have a television in our house, we never have. And I say, go out and get one. Because your child will not be prepared for the world out there if she or he doesn't know how to live with these media, how to turn them on, to do things that they can do well, and to turn them off when there are other things to do. Yeah.
I was just going to say I couldn't agree more. I'm a high school teacher, and I sometimes see students who have not been exposed to television and other forms of media, and it's not pretty. It's not pretty the way they're treated because they miss a whole social side of this world that they're just not being exposed to.
Exactly. And, you know, I did college health for a number of years, and you know, there were some kids who get to their first year of college and they go out and they get drunk all the time, and others who go out and have sex all the time. And there's a subset that go out and watch soap opera reruns and marathons all the time too. Because look, there's a box on the wall, it makes pictures. But also you bring up a really important point, which is this is our shared cultural experience. This is what in Renaissance Europe the Roman Catholic Church was, where the noblemen and the peasants got together once a week and sang the same songs and looked at the same images and told the same stories, what gave their culture resonance. And you're absolutely right about that. But can there be too much media time? Kids staring at their smartphones or the television or whatever. Well, for several decades now, we have known that there is a dose-response relationship between hours of television time and your risk of overweight and obesity. With each increased hour on average, your risk goes up. But we went to the kids from 2010 and we split that group into thirds. Those who watch the most, those who watch the least, and the moderate ones. And the first thing that was interesting is where the thirds broke. The light users were only 3 hours or less a day. The heavy users were 16 hours or more a day. This is their cumulative exposure with the multitasking. And we asked them 3 questions. We said, do you get high grades or fair or poor grades? Do you get in trouble a lot? And how contented are you? And what was interesting is that the heavy users had twice the poor outcomes of the light users in every single category. Now, again, this is not necessarily causal, because you can see how that kid who feels lonely and, you know, not part of the social group might spend time in front of a screen instead of being with the group. But the question is, can that time in front of the screen also not give her or him the opportunity to learn how to get along with the group and how to get socialized? And so it may be becoming a downward spiral in that case. I have been getting more and more kids who are coming in where it's not usually their chief complaint, it's usually their parents' chief complaint of falling asleep in school, and interestingly, even when they stay awake, not remembering what they learned yesterday. And what I ask them and find out that more and more of them are sleeping like this, with their cell phone on vibrate under their pillow or on the bedside stand or whatever. And when you ask them why they do that, they say, it's my alarm clock, right? Like you can't go and get a $5 alarm clock, you know, at a store, right? What they're doing is that they are staying up late, texting each other. And not only are they getting less sleep, but they're getting poorer quality sleep because they are staying at a lighter sleep level to listen for that vibrate to go off so they can get that WTF at 3 in the morning. And so what's happening is that they're not getting into the stage 4 deep REM sleep where they move what they experience from the short-term memory centers into their learning centers. And so even if they're awake in algebra class today, they can't remember what they did in algebra class yesterday because they didn't complete that circle of learning. They are always online. So what is happening online? Well, let's go back to these data from 2010, which are probably hopelessly obsolete now. It's probably gone up since then. And ask them, because this is anonymous, you know, they tell their parents that they're working on their English paper or their math worksheet, right? And the screen is always open to that English paper, but there might be a screen or two open behind that. Because what they're telling us is they spend an average of 16 minutes a day on homework, about an hour downloading video and music, and an hour and a half on social media and gaming. And what's happening there? 42% of 10 to 17-year-olds say they've ended up on porn sites. 4% have been asked for sexual pictures of themselves by someone they don't know online. Small number until you realize that's like one kid in every classroom. Cyberbullying, the use of the internet and electronic media to threaten, harass, coerce, ostracize, basically do all kinds of harm, psychological harm to others online, is 21% of females and 8.5% of males. Now, it's not that many. Look at what it is in 4th to 8th graders. It's actually higher in the younger kids. 58% say they've received and 53% have sent hurtful messages. Now, this is a little different dynamic than what happens with traditional bullying, where the big boy gave wedgies to the little boy in the playground, where the cool girls were mean to the uncool girls. What's happening here is because what bullying is effectively is someone systematically harming someone else over and over again because of a power differential. But online, the power differential is unclear. And so we are seeing the rise of the victim bully. So look at this overlap here. The kids who are being bullied are turning around and bullying others, sometimes even bullying the people that bullied them. Perhaps most concerningly, 58% have not mentioned cyberbullying to an adult. Not because they don't think we care, but because they think we're so clueless about this environment that what we will do is the last thing they want us to do, take away their device. To them, that Facebook account, that cell phone, is their last line of defense. Their monitoring system, so they know what goes on. And I actually had a 14-year-old girl come in because she went home one day, everything was fine, she had lots of friends at school. She came in the next day and no one would talk to her. And when finally she went to a friend of hers and said, "What's going on?" She said, "I don't talk to sluts." And what had happened overnight is a whole rumor mill had happened over texting about her, none of which was true. So what happens when we ask them to turn it off? So this is an experiment done years ago now with 1,000 college students in 10 countries in 5 different continents, and we asked them to turn everything off for 24 hours, one day. Globalization is real. I literally did not know what to do with myself from the UK. I didn't use my cell phone all night. I can't live without media from Chile. I felt lonely as if I was in a small cage on an island. A haiku from China. Sometimes I felt dead from Argentina. Media is my drug. Without it, I was lost. I'm an addict. How can I survive 24 hours? And from the good old US of A, I was itching like a crackhead because I could not use my phone. What is going on here? Well, is there such a thing as internet or video gaming addiction disorder? Well, when you look at the sort of cardinal criteria of any addiction, whether it be to heroin or alcohol, there are 4 kind of features to it. Excessive use. They're using more than anybody else is. Increasing tolerance. They need faster computers, bigger screens, more software, the latest whatever. They have withdrawal symptoms. And they are away from it, they get irritable, they get antisocial, and all those symptoms disappear the moment they get back online. And they're willing to take on negative consequences for it. They're willing to give up that social event, or they're willing to borrow dad's or mom's credit card to keep their World of Warcraft subscription up. Korea, which has this as a formal diagnosis, has 250,000 kids under the age of 18 in treatment right now for this, and they estimate it's 1/10 of the problem in Korea.
Can I ask how long they've been treating it for? Like, when did they recognize it as a disorder?
Late 90s, 98 or 99. And 97 is when the US, at least, the American Medical Association, American Psychiatric Association started discussing whether we should take it seriously as an issue. And I'm giving away a punchline from a couple lines down on this slide, but it is still not considered a diagnosis, which means that we can't treat for it because they'll end up having to pay, they'll have to pay, their insurance won't pay for it. See, you don't have that problem here. We have that problem in the States. But the kids who meet criteria in Korea for internet addiction disorder are more obsessive compulsive, they're more depressed, they're more anxious, more hostility, more paranoia, and they have lower interpersonal sensitivity than those kids who do not. Now here's a really interesting thing for those of you, particularly in education. Much higher prevalence in kids with ADD and ADHD. And as many of you who have dealt with this know, the computer environment is a great environment for helping kids with ADD focus in because it's a nice, controlled, circumscribed environment, and it's a great workaround for getting past the things that are much harder in a noisy, chaotic classroom or even concentrating on a book. So it may be a place of relative mastery for them. Interestingly, when they start playing their games, the symptoms subside. In fact, attention, I see you, I'll ask you in a second, the attention scales that are done before and after playing video games, they actually show measurable improvement in their attention immediately after. It extinguishes after a while, but they actually are better at attention after they played a video game for a while. Yeah?
Internet addiction was actually added to DSM-5 in May 2013.
It was not. Read the fine print. It says requires further study. And what that means is that come back to us when you have some data. Yeah, there's a whole subcategory. In fact, the only behavioral addiction that's in the DSM-5 is gambling. And so sex addiction, all those other things are not considered diagnoses. And the trickle down, at least in the States, is that you can't write that as a diagnosis and actually have an insurance company pay for this person's treatment. I have 1 or 2 new patients referred to me every week for a variation of this. And I am having to treat insomnia when they're staying up all night playing World of Warcraft, or treat anxiety when they're so freaked out by playing Call of Duty all the time that they won't walk the dog at night anymore because they're scared someone's going to jump out from a bush. And yes, they do have anxiety, and yes, they do have insomnia, but it's not a standalone issue here. Interestingly, kids who meet these criteria, when you give them methylphenidate or Ritalin, most old-fashioned common treatment for ADD, a stimulant, their symptoms actually subside. So there's some kind of cross-wiring here that we haven't quite figured out yet. And as we said, it's not an accepted diagnosis yet. So let's go back to those 1,000 kids that were told to turn it all off for 24 hours and ask them for reflections on it after 2 weeks. It was unpleasant to realize I'm in a constant state of distraction. When you really get off the media, you realize how many quality things you can do. I interacted with my parents more than usual. Imagine that. And I love this one. I've lived with my best friends for 3 years. This is one of the best days we've spent together. I am now recommending not just to kids and families who have an addictive or pathological relationship with it, but to everybody, that they consider taking a digital Sabbath. 1 day a week where it all goes off. And they all look at me like, you gotta be kidding me. Dad's there with his crackberry, and mom's with, and they're giving the iPads to the kids when they go to the restaurant. You notice that now? Little kids are all quiet in restaurants now because they're all into the mobile devices. But the parents that have tried it have come back and said it's phenomenal. They go for walks. They throw a ball around the backyard. They go to museums. All of a sudden, they're discovering each other. They're having conversations with each other. So it's something to think about. And in fact, even people who are in the tech industry, I have a good friend who is a filmmaker who said, my work has gotten better by stepping away from the tools for 24 hours every 7 days. Back in the day, we used to figure out what parts of the brain did what by waiting until someone had a traumatic brain injury or a stroke and we saw what functions they lost. But now we can put them in the MRI machine and have them do things like tap their fingers together or sing a song or look at a color. And we can map out exactly these little discrete areas of activity. And interestingly, some researchers actually in British Columbia turned on the tube once in between tasks. When someone who's, if you've ever been in an MRI machine, if you're not claustrophobic, it's got to be one of the most boring places on earth because you're staring at beige plastic 6 inches from your face. So someone said, what happens if we turn it on when they're in between doing things? And a whole diverse area of the brain lit up when their mind was just wandering. And of course, in our infinite wisdom, we immediately labeled this the default mode network, as in your brain doing nothing. We also labeled junk DNA back in the day, and now we realize that it's the whole source of epigenetics, how we actually are able to learn and pass on to the next generation various traits. So people started asking, well, what were you doing? Well, the last thing you showed me was cardboard colored red, and that red reminded me that I have tomatoes in the garden that need to be picked, and they're probably past their time, so I'll make tomato sauce and I'll use grandma's recipe, but grandma died last year and that makes me feel sad, but I met a second cousin I never knew. And when our minds wander, we go from memory to sensation to thought to realization, like a butterfly from flower to flower. And there are people now who are actively working on the default mode network, not as a place where your brain is idling, but as a place where we're building the self, where we're building that unique template that is only us. No one else in the world has it. There are others who, realizing that this is a place where your ideas go in all directions and then come back together, are looking at it as the source of creativity. You know, you go out and you collect all these diverse things and put them together in new ways. Interestingly, IQ scores, for those educators you know, from the late 1800s have been measured pretty consistently, and what we've seen is something called the Flynn effect, which is at each generation, the average population IQ goes up by 10 points. We're getting smarter, right? Well, look at what the IQ test tests. It tests our ability to access information and put it together. There are other kinds of intelligence, including creativity, and there's also the creativity quotient, or CQ, which has been measured since the 1950s, and it has steadily gone down since 1950 in the population. So the question is, are we gaining something and losing something by not allowing our default mode network to work? And it reminds me again, going back to history, that there was a very bored patent officer working in Switzerland. He used to walk to work beside the river and look at the eddies and swirls in the water, go into the office, stamp a bunch of meaningless papers, go back home beside the river, go upstairs and write up a little thing called the theory of relativity. And when Einstein, late in his life, was asked, how did you come up with this incredibly complex theory that no one can disprove? He said, it's because I was bored. Bring back boredom. When was the last time you saw a kid say, I'm so bored, and lie on the back of the grass and make shapes out of the clouds? What are we giving away by constantly stimulating ourselves with television and internet and video games and our smartphones and texts? So, the Center on Media and Child Health does 3 things. The first thing we're trying to do is to reframe this discussion, as we started this, from this right and wrong, good and bad, should and shouldn't, to what do we know about how we are changed by the media we use and how we use them. And we do that in 3 ways. We do the research, we investigate. We translate that research for parents, teachers, anybody who works with children, and we innovate with media to create child-supportive, child-healthy information. And I'm going to talk more about the latter 2 because I've given you a lot of research up until now to wrap it up. So how do we deal with this? Well, instead of saying no, instead of taking the devices away, instead of restricting and creating the forbidden fruit, we need to empower the digital natives. Because after all, they've been using this stuff since the day they were born. You gotta hope that one was a C-section. How do we do that? We let them lean on their own strengths, their own abilities, their own natural ability to interface with that iPad, that smartphone, the television, and understand how they're being changed and take control of that. I'm going to show you a little bit from a project we did with regular public school kids in Vermont. These are not art students, but their task in the course of a semester was to really understand how to deconstruct the media that was being directed to them, first with commercials, because commercials are really obvious and they're easy to pick apart, but then with program material, and then to conceive, write, direct, produce, and shoot in one class period a 1-minute PSA on anything they wanted to do it on. And I'm just going to show you one of the final versions of it, and there are a bunch of these. Not bad. They're very, I mean, and this is all their work, but this is about giving them the tools to do what, you know, is being done to them all the time. We have, for the last 20-some years now, been doing a project at Children's of Boston where we had, instead of saying, tell us how you fit into our category, I've been handing video camcorders to sick kids and saying, teach me. Teach me what it's like to live with what you're living with asthma, with cystic fibrosis, overweight, spina bifida. And they have come up with phenomenal stuff that is not at all what people expected. That, you know, instead of us defining illness and wellness, them telling us how their lives are affected and how they live with it. And we're learning a lot about why they don't necessarily do what we think they should do. And we are now taking this into a social media environment where they create these visual illness narratives and they're building community. Because one of the things that we learned was not only did their clinicians learn what was really going on for them, but they got better simply from self-expression, simply from shooting video, because they built their self-efficacy. And when we actually brought some of them together to do screenings, they were like instant family. And this was all before the social media thing happened. So we said, well, what happens if we put a whole bunch of kids with asthma anywhere in the world together and had them create a community? And they connect with each other, and they can not only get better by learning from each other, but they can get better by helping each other, by being masters of that experience. And this is...
In general, you know, there are just a lot of different things that I have to worry about, you know, like, can I get in and out of places, you know. I don't like people to think that way. I mean, I like people that, you know, treat me the same way they would treat anybody else.
And I think sometimes the reason why, you know, I eat the way I eat is because either I'm mad or I'm sad or people look at me strange. I really don't know the reason why, but it's like I'll eat even if I'm not hungry. If I'm hurting, I feel that's when I eat the most, you know what I'm saying?
And we have them for asthma, for paralysis, for spina bifida, for cystic fibrosis. And we're calling it a healthy selfie. So this desire to make selfies all the time. Here I am, you know, I don't know, making a peanut butter sandwich. Aren't you interested? But to take that desire to be a star of one's own moment and use it as a way to reach out to each other and to not only offer help to each other, but to offer one's own vulnerability to others to be helped. Well, if we can get the digital natives on board, then we have to deal with us, the digital immigrants. The ones who are 5 steps behind our kids. If we're lucky, we're only 5 steps behind them. And that's translating the research into action steps that parents and teachers and clinicians can use. And we do that in a bunch of ways. We have a website at this base. Actually, I have, somewhere I put it, I think it's up here. Actually, I have a sign-up list if anybody's interested in getting some of our information online. We'll offer that later. And there's also little cards in here with all of our access to stuff. And there's a lot of research there and tools and strategies and tip sheets. This is an example of a tip sheet for parents of grade schoolers. And what it does is it tries to boil down into very basic, simple steps, where they are developmentally, how that interfaces with media, and what you can do about it. Those are also available on our website. We also have an online advice column for parenting digital natives called Ask the Mediatrician. And I get everything from, at what age should I give my kid a mobile phone, and how should I introduce it, to how do I get my kid to quit singing Viva Viagra in the supermarket. And I get everything in between, from the ridiculous to the sublime. And we try to answer these questions in ways that are based in the research, that are balanced in the sense that it's not saying that's bad and you shouldn't do that, or you should feel guilty, or your kid should be punished, but it's saying here are the positives, here are the things to be concerned about, and that are practical, that are things you can go home and do right now. You don't have to buy a book or a device or take a course to do. We have a research blog for the academics in the crowd. With the latest research, we have a parenting e-newsletter that comes out on a pretty regular basis based on the school year, based on what's going on for kids, what's happening in the news. And we have YouTube channel, Twitter feed, Instagram, and Facebook. What do you do with all this stuff? Okay, let's think about it, okay? Obviously, not all of us are on all these things. Who has the time to be on all these things? But what's happening is that different communities are using different types of media. That's the reality out there in the world. So for example, our Facebook page has become kind of an electronic village square, where, for example, there'll be an Ask the Mediatrician on cell phones, and then all these parents will come in and say, well, the rules in my town or my school are this, this, and this, and here's how we modified it, and we're teaching each other. Has anybody here ever cooked with epicurious.com? Yeah. You notice how you read down to the bottom of the comments, the recipe gets really, really good once people have added all the stuff and cut out the sugar and did this. Same sort of thing is happening, which is that we're learning from each other, we're supporting each other. Parenting is an art more than a science, and it's imperfect. So I always say, forgive yourself and try to be better. We will not be perfect, we will be imperfect, but that doesn't mean we can't keep perfecting it. So let's wrap this up with an example of how one would approach a problem using the science. Let's take something that freaks everybody out, sexting. Let's think about what happens with sexting. 13-year-old girl falls in love with the man she will love till the day she dies. It's Romeo and Juliet. So to show her undying love, either because he asks her to or not, she flashes him on camera a nice little private message. By the time he gets it, he's all over her and he's thinking about the other kid in the second row. So he shares it with 1 or 2 of his friends, and they share it with 1 or 2 of their friends. And guess what? They are, at least in the US, guilty of child pornography felony. And they can be registered sex offenders in 6 states. I would say that the law is a pretty blunt instrument for dealing with human nature. So let's think about how we can deal with this in a way that's based in the scientific evidence. Let's think about what's going on. They're at the peak of their sexual urge and their sexual cluelessness. They're incredibly expert with the devices. They are surrounded by clueless us. And they don't have a prefrontal cortex yet. Little things like impulse control and future thinking. There's a reason why you can't rent a car till you're 25. And that's because that's where the risk of renting it to you is less than the risk of losing the money, right? Same sort of thing. We know from brain development now that we don't have full executive function until the late 20s. And it's probably going to be later. Every time we look, it seems to be later and later and later in terms of the nuances. So what we have here is the perfect storm. We have human nature and biology as it's always been in this new environment. And we have to learn how to manage this new environment. So what matters, finally? What do you want? What is the little thing you're going to remember and take home with you? The message in the media matters. What's in there? Is it violent? Is it pro-social? Is it sexy? What is going on? The environment in which they take in or they use these media. It is very different to look at a romantic movie as a 14-year-old boy with a bunch of your buds, or with a girl you're interested in, or with mom, right? So remember, the environment has an effect. And one of the things that we found is that kids who watch stuff that has, for example, discussion of condoms in it, and discuss it with their parents, not only learn, but retain that knowledge better than even the kids who watch it, and obviously better than the kids who never see it. The developmental stage of the child, a 2-year-old is not a 12-year-old, is not a 20-year-old. And so while a 20-year-old may be able to handle some violent video games, you're not going to put the 2-year-old in front of them, and you don't want to let the 2-year-old walk through the room while the 20-year-old is playing the violent video games. Information that you bring to it has a huge effect. The stuff we talked about tonight, how to deconstruct it, understanding that it affects us and how it changes us, and that we are all changed by the media we use and how we use them. And ultimately, the amount matters. So remember that on those wonderful devices we have, this is the single most important feature. And to close with, actually, a video done by my friend, the one who takes a digital Sabbath, and says her work is much better. Let's push it.
I see the best minds of my generation distracted by texting, emailing, tweeting, dragging their cursors through Google links at dawn, looking for an info fix. Angel-headed hipsters burning for the ultra-fast heavenly connection to the starry dynamo and the machinery of night, who wired and networked and hollow-eyed and caffeinated, sat up searching in the imaginary comfort of Facebook friends, floating across the tops of cities, contemplating signals, who bared their brains to GPS under satellites and saw Wikipedian angels editing on collective knowledge illuminated, who passed through Wi-Fi hotspots with radiant Bluetooth earphones, hallucinating avatars in low-res Second Life islands among the gamers of Warcraft, who were expelled from chat rooms with dreams, with wireless nightmares, megapixels, alcohol, YouTube, and endless eyeballs, who connected via instant messaging in underwear, burning their money on eBay impulse purchases, tapping into the zeitgeist through the synapses of Twitter, who jacked in continuously 70 hours from Pandora to iPod to Amazon to Flickr to Boing Boing, yakety-yakking, primal screaming, unblinking, participating. Unplug! 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 I'm with you in the compulsion to check inboxes, news feeds, and Facebook. Unplug! I'm with you in the addiction and longing for focus. Unplug! I'm with you to cut the umbilical cord of data. Unplug! I'm with you to disconnect from the infosphere. Unplug! I'm with you to power down and revisit the present tense.
So thank you for being shot from a cannon with me.
still a voice to answer a few questions?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let me get my water. Yeah. You got it up first. Yes. You're the winner. Hi, Denise.
For the lovely cradle to grave media experts, they leave childhood and come to university. And for many of us in the room, we are absolutely struggling with wanting them to pay attention to us when in fact it is evident that they are doing anything but. I have taken the tack not to simply admonish them, but to take them through some description about why it's in their best interest not to do this. I explain that the frontal cortex doesn't know better yet, but it's still not working. I simply bashed my head against the wall in a futile attempt to do anything better, or do you have enough of it?
Thanks for bringing that one and dropping it in my lap. First of all, they're not bad kids. You know what I mean? This is not their intent. And I think the best way to do it is create intentionality in them. So maybe in the very first lecture, you say, what do you want from this course? And let's write up on the board the things you want from this course. Because they're not going to say, I want an A. Right? They're going to say the things they want to do. And then work with them through the process of getting to that place, what they want to get. That gives you the basis, the foundation on which to discuss it with them going forward. Because what we're not saying here is don't use media. What we're saying is use media mindfully. Use it in directed, focused ways for the things it does well. And remember that technology is really the science of tools. It's tools. An iPad is just a tool. It's a tool that does some things extremely well, but it doesn't do everything well. You can use an iPad to drive a nail, but I would prefer a hammer, right? So the thing to do is to think about these tools and to use them for what they do well, but also to realize that there are other things out there beyond it. And so one of the things that I'll say, and this is jumping back to the early childhood, but it kind of relates to what you're doing, is not to do media time restrictions. People go, what? I'll tell you why. First of all, with all the screens around us all the time, how do you even calculate, let alone restrict screen exposure? So the other thing that happens, particularly with young kids, is that it becomes the forbidden fruit. Oh, it's so special that mommy says I can only have an hour a day. So what do? The moment I get home from school, I get in front of it. And at the end of that hour, I'm not volunteering to turn it off. So mommy comes wandering up at about an hour and 15 minutes and say, hey, your hour is up. Oh, no, the program's not over. I got to get to the end of this level, whatever. So every single time it becomes a conflict and becomes a headbutting. And when it finally gets off, they're exhausted not only from using the best part of their day for the default action of vegging out in front of a screen, but also from fighting with you. So what I suggest, and this is where it sort of relates back to your college students, is even with very young kids, you can sit down and say, let's think about your day. Let's think about your 24 hours. You need this many hours of sleep. You need a sit-down family meal once a day, single most protective thing you can do with your kids, not just for nutrition, but for psychological health and everything else. You like playing basketball? Let's put in an hour there. Let's do this. And what you're doing is basically budgeting their day out. And not only are you letting them prioritize the things they like to do, but you're also teaching them time management, which is something that we could all do a lot better with and could start a lot earlier with. And I think you can do the same thing with your college students, which is, okay, you're in this course, blank, to learn that. What do you want to do? We have a semester to do it in. What do you want to do? Where do you want to be at the end of the semester? And make them mindful of the transaction that's going on, rather than getting into an adversarial relationship like, why aren't you listening to me? Right? But it's more about, I'm here because you're paying for me to be here. You're paying for me to impart something to you. What do you want? And just flip the paradigm upside down. See if it works. Give me an email. Tell me how it works. No, I'm telling you, we're learning this as we go along. And but it's what I do with my students. And it depends on the student. you know. Yeah.
Okay, so my question related to what you just spoke about. So I have 3 children, 7, 10, 13. And so I've got the time restriction, right? I think it's 2 hours a day is sort of the recommended, or it might even be more, but I said now.
Let me tell you a little secret about that.
Yeah, tell me.
They pulled that out of the air.
Oh, really?
There's no data backing that.
Well,
Okay, there's none at all. I think you got to decide in your own family what the rhythms of life are. And I think ultimately, what we owe our children and our students is a rich and diverse menu of experience, right? And media can be part of that, but it doesn't have to be everything. And we've kind of fallen into the default where it's everything. I'm sorry, I've got off on a tangent. Please finish your question.
That's along the line. So it works fairly well. We say you can have an hour, whatever screens you want after dinner, so they don't rush home. They have to play outside. We're doing screens in the car somewhat, and they can glance out the window and talk about the importance of that. But also have the, you know what, if it's a creative screen, if you want to make a movie with your brother and sister, if you want, I even think Minecraft is creative as long as you're not fighting each other. So I'm lenient in that. That's a really cool thing you're doing. Keep doing it. Draw something or whatever. So it's not really strict. I'm just wondering if that's what you mean by.
Well, here I'll push it one step further. Throw out the words lenient and strict, because you're not a police officer. You're there to enrich their lives, and that can be part of that enrichment. But you know what? It might actually be good not just to look outside the car window, but to have to look at it because there's nothing else to do. Because all of a sudden you start to see things you wouldn't see otherwise, right? So it's not like you're constantly saying, well, what's more interesting, watching YouTube or SpongeBob or, looking, oh, yeah, well, SpongeBob's way better than outside, right? I think that there is a value in a vacuum. There's a value in boredom. There's a value in just saying, keep yourself busy. Kids don't build forts in the woods anymore because they don't have to. They can do it in Minecraft. Yeah.
I'm talking about screens, but what about music? Is that also the same thing? Like if my child is plugged into music all the time, so she's looking at the car window, or she likes to listen to music. I don't know which person is thinking of, but is it the same thing?
Well, every medium works differently on us. For example, music is a wonderful first medium for very young children because it's more participatory. You can sing along, you can dance, you can move, you can bang things together. But the issue with music used that way is it's a way to basically check out from the rest of the world and not interact. And so, she could be listening to Mozart, she'd still be checked out, right? And so the issue is not so much that the music is bad, but that the way she's sort of shaping that menu of experience that is her 24-hour day is to be checked out for a fair amount of time. And one of the things I'm hearing back from teachers who've seen sort of cohorts of kids go through is the 2 things that they see as a huge difference with kids who are plugged in all the time is, first of all, they don't know how to talk to someone. They don't know how to look someone in the eye. They don't know how to observe personal space. They're like this all the time because they're used to doing this all the time, right? So they're like this and kind of whatever. And that they have a hard time with or are incapable of reflective thinking because they've never built the building blocks of experience or knowledge. They just Google everything. Right? So it's a very different transaction that's going on. I was hiking in the mountains of New Hampshire about a week ago with my 10-year-old. We're climbing up and we're approaching the summit of this mountain. And all of a sudden I hear this sort of tinny music coming down the hill toward me. And a man and a woman come up and we're just saying hi and this, that, and the other. And I had a t-shirt on actually from the center. And they said, what is that? And I said, it's a place that studies people like your son who had just come around the corner with a boom, not a boombox, but like a Walkman, but blasting open speakers. And I said, it's to teach kids to listen to the wind in the trees. And then I kept going up and they kept going down. And I have no idea if they think, oh, what a jerk that guy is. Or whether they got them thinking. But we don't do that stuff anymore. Kids don't do that stuff anymore. Not because they can't, but because they never think of it, because they're filling themselves with external stimulation all the time and not letting themselves open to the world. So that would be my concern about that. Your daughter's now going to hate me. She already does, don't worry. Yeah.
I have 2 boys, 2 years apart. They fight a lot.
Yeah, that's what they're supposed to do.
Exactly. So they play their video games, nice and quiet. It's nice for a little while, but I don't like them playing a whole lot of time, so I'll turn it off. Grandma and Grandpa are watching them, and they go, look how well they're cooperating. And they go on and on and on, and I'm just rolling my eyes going, okay.
That's because Grandma and Grandpa go home and don't see the fights that happen after they've been playing Call of Duty for 4 hours. Right, but you know what I'm... I think that, first of all, video games in particular are among the best educational technologies yet developed. If you think about it, they create a virtual reality. They create a set of conditions, they create a storyline, they create a set of rules, and if you do certain things a certain way, you're rewarded. If you do other things, you're punished. And you get to practice them over and over and over again in what psychologists call behavioral scripts. So if you're playing soccer, that's one thing. If you're playing, you know, kill the terrorist, it's another thing. But you are learning whatever it is. You are learning as much from that as you're learning from anything else. So my sort of rule of thumb is video games are great in the context of a richer life, but understand that what your child does, your child will learn, and your child will be changed by. And I have gotten into no end of public discussions in front of the US Congress even, with media producers who say, there's no evidence that we're changed by the media we use. Oh, and by the way, will you buy advertising on my program? Of course we're changed by the media we use. We buy toothpaste because of the media we use. We vote for political candidates because of the media we use. We're learning all the time, and kids are learning more and faster than the rest of us because they have less experience back there, and they're filling that void with what they're seeing and learning. So, good luck. I have 2 boys 2 years apart too, so we can commiserate. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm interested to hear what you have to say about that, because I'm just ready to go on Google Scholar.
Well, you know, you're absolutely right. They learn both. I mean, they learn both from Twilight and from their mother. I think that what we have to realize is that kids are, we all are, a mosaic of all the experiences we've had and the things that we've sort of glommed onto and say, I want to be like that, or I don't want to be like that, or I do want to do this or don't want to do that. But I have seen any number of kids with all kinds of variations on, you know, anxiety from, you know, playing violent games or watching violent movies. We have to remember that the developmental stage, the D in that media acronym, developmental stage is critical. And a lot of times parents don't realize that when they're putting their kid in front of cartoons, like Looney Tunes with Wile E. Coyote, these kids under the age of 7 or 8 are incapable of distinguishing fantasy from reality. Okay, they'll tell you, I know it's only make-believe, but when you actually measure their anxiety levels, there's as much anxiety from a cartoon as there is from something in real life. And where that struck home really hard to me is that immediately after 9/11, they put together at our hospital a small task force that went out to kids in the community because we were very concerned that they'd spent a whole day watching towers crash to the ground and, you know, people looking for their relatives and all the stuff that was going on. And in community after community, the parents were freaked out. This was like in the 6 to 8 weeks after it happened. The kids were kind of going, whatever, I've seen it on TV. Not only were they desensitized, but it had no more reality to them than cartoons. It was the same, and that's just brain development. So we have to remember that kids are going to see and experiencing things much differently than we do. Watch a bunch of 5 or 6 year olds watching The Lion King. Nice G movie, right? Watch when Scar kills Mufasa. Every kid turns to their parent. Every kid turns to see if mom or dad is still there. It's heartbreaking to watch it, and that's Disney. You go through all the Disneys. It's all about abandonment and loss, you know, of parents. So we have to recognize that our brains are in a very different place than the brains of the kids who are watching it, and we can't just sort of explain it away based on adult concepts. We have to really understand the journey they're taking through the experience of life. Yeah. Oops.
And then we've probably talked about, but after that, the opportunity, Michael's staying in this hotel, so I'm...
Let's retire to the bar.
I have 2 boys, and they are 9, 7, and 4. And one has diagnosed ADD, the other may and may not, but I am the person of the devices, so iPads, etc., because that's the role I have to play. It is impossible to get them off. Do you have suggestions for that?
Do you use a device?
I would say I'm a medium user.
Medium user. Well, the first thing is remember that kids hear about 1% of what we say and 100% of what we do. So the first thing to do is to remember to model behavior that you want to see in them, that you think is the right way to be. Because the number of times I've seen parents doing the crackberry prayer saying, get off the TV, get off the TV, stop watching, right? So we have to be conscious of the way we are being seen, for starters. The second thing is, it's okay to say no. It's okay to parent them. You know, and I think that we've gotten into a place where we feel we have to be our kids' best friends, but the reality is the kids I see who are having real problems as adolescents are the ones whose parents basically let them get away with whatever they wanted to when they were younger. Kids will complain and cry and tantrum, but they thrive on limit setting. They thrive on it. So just turn it off. Take it away. It's okay. You're the parent. So if they are using it excessively, if they're using it as a default activity, etc., and one of the things you can do is, you know, if you feel that they're really sort of like overwhelmed by it, is do a detox. Say, we're going camping for 2 weeks, right? We're going to find, there is actually a guidebook of places in North America that get no signal. There is. You can buy it at the bookstore, you know, right? But you can do a detox. In other words, get them involved in alternative activities. The other thing to do is not say, turn it off and shut up. It's, hey, let's do this. Let's go out and throw a football around, or let's go out and, you know, find frogs. I don't know. But find an alternative that is, you know, taking the place of it rather than saying turn that off. So it's not a punitive thing, it's an alternative. It's a redirection in a sense. If that makes sense. Easier said than done.
Michael, just to say, you're very welcome to stay on and talk to Michael and others on this. We do have a reception afterwards, so if you're feeling hungry, there's something there to sustain you. I'd also remind the Harshman Scholarship winners that would like to Grace that she's staying a little while before she goes on her car back to Toronto. So, but let me in closing also thank Michael for a very stimulating presentation and dealing beautifully with an unexpected failure with our life. So he really is a dance man. So